Hello, everyone. This is Claudiu Murgan, the host of the Spiritual Inspire Show. And my guest today is Robert Christian Minson. He's an international speaker, best-selling contributing author, trainer, coach, breath facilitator for the Transformational Breath Foundation, which is one of the largest breath schools on the planet today. And he's the founder of Breathflow Wellness, a world-renowned transformational holistic health and wellness platform to share the life-changing techniques of breathwork. A former monk, Christian spent 10 years in the Yogic Monastery of Self-Realization Fellowship, founded by Paramanhansa Yogananda, who wrote the Autobiography of a Yogi, in Los Angeles to serve as Yogananda's instrument for the presentation of his writings and teachings, including Kriya Yoga. After years searching for the meaning of his life in the monastery, Christian now teaches and guides others to find meaning in their own personal and professional lives by delivering inspiration and practical real-world tools that result in higher level of vibration, creation, alignment, fulfillment, and performance. For several years, Christian was the breathwork program director at Rhythmia, a life advancement center in Costa Rica, specializing in fusing ancient wisdom and modern techniques for healing and creating a life you love. Christian has worked alongside the thought leader Greg Braden and has shared his message and techniques across the globe, including Europe, Mexico, Canada, and all over the USA. He has shared his messages in studios, universities, churches, and the Chopra Center. Christian, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, I mentioned that you're a monk for 10 years. How did you find that path, and especially why Self-Realization Fellowship and Yogananda? And full disclosure, I'm also a member of the same organization.
Yeah, well, great to have you as a brother on the path. And I mean, I don't know where you want me to begin, because I mean, this story could start from the beginning of my spiritual search, or it could, start from where I started to get out of the darkness and actually find some light. What's your preference?
You can give us a short snippet of how you stepped on your spiritual path, and from there, the transition towards SRF.
Well, how I got in my spiritual path kind of takes me full circle to, as you mentioned, I was working at Rhythmia Life Advances Center recently, which specializes in plant medicine or a psychedelic substance. And it was actually through psychedelics that I had my first awakening, or what I call a God moment, where I perceived the essence of a greater entity that guides us all. And from there, I started on my path, my spiritual path, which led me in university to join different meditation groups. I was in a group that specifically was started by a guru named Sri Chinmoy. You may have heard of him. He was based in Queens, New York, for decades. When he came over from India, just like Paramanhansa Yogananda. But in this meditation group, I was living in St. Louis, Missouri at the time, and going to school there. And one of the meditation cohorts there, a friend of mine, handed me the book Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramanhansa Yogananda, and said, "You might really enjoy this, being in this group and all." And I read that book. And as I read it, it was like he was explaining the thoughts in my head that I had no words for. It's like, this is how I believe, this is how I feel the universe and the world is constructed. I just had never been able to articulate it or verbalize it. So, of course, that really inspired me to dig deeper. And though, that kind of went on the back shelf as I, being in university, being a young kid, still kind of lived the party lifestyle, and I graduated college and I got into the world, and, it gave me a few hard knocks. I was definitely, to make the long story short, hit rock bottom in my life in my very early 20s, and was really just searching for something to help me get out of this. And so I went down to my bookshelf and I wanted to find a book to help inspire me. But I didn't want to find a big book. I wanted to find a little book that, that could inspire me quickly. And to this day, I don't know how this book got on my bookshelf, but I saw this little book. I mean, it was about this big, pulled it off my bookshelf, and it was Metaphysical Meditations by Paramanhansa Yogananda. So it's basically a book of different affirmations and things like that you can repeat to yourself in a style of meditation to go deeper into that thought and try to really reach the essence. So I pulled that off my shelf. I started meditating that way, and it started to work. It started to help bring me out of my dark funk and into a little bit more peace and equilibrium. And so in the back of that book was, information on how to apply for the Self-Realization Fellowship lessons, to know more information. So I got on that track. I started receiving the lessons, started learning the formal meditation techniques of Kriya Yoga. That started to bring me even more out of that funk and not only bring me to an equilibrium, but started bringing me some peace and joy in my life. And so one of the tenets in these lessons is that environment is stronger than willpower. And to mean that the environment you're in is really going to influence you to act even against your will if you stay in it long enough. And so being in this more party environment, all my friends from college and things I was still hanging out with, I decided to make a move to Southern California, where the Self-Realization Fellowship was headquartered. And in that move was an attempt to get into a more wholesome, holistic environment. And I started going to the temple there, meditating every night. I started volunteering there. I even got a job at the retreat, which was next door, which was serving not only the retreatants, but also the monastics that were living in the property. So I got to see every day the monastics come out for recreation and such, and seeing how they seemed happy and whole. And as it was, going to the temple, working 6 days a week, and then on the seventh day I was in at the temple and such. The next logical step was just to devote my whole life to this path, and so I made the leap to apply to become a monk, and it wasn't a process that happened overnight, but as I say, long story short, I was accepted in and then began to live that lifestyle for the next 10 years.
It's a big commitment. I mean, you have to, as you said, leave behind your loved ones, your life you are used with, and everything else, and dedicate yourself to, God and Yogananda's teachings and everything you value at that time. And then the environment will take care of you, because you are going to become better and much more used to communicating with the divinity, I assume.
Right. Well, that was definitely the hard part, was kind of the monastic life is a life of renunciation. Renunciation is letting go of all those things that you used as your support before, whether those are old habits, whether those are old environments, whether those are old relationships. And that's probably the hardest one, including your family and such, because these are relationships that start guiding you down a path that was different than the path now that you're currently on. And a lot of people don't understand. They don't understand what it takes to stay devoted to a path of seeking the highest purpose of life, which is the rekindling of the divinity within us and becoming God-like ourselves. So all that was a necessary part, though painful. It's like pruning a branch. It looks like you maybe made the tree look a little bare, but in the pruning, new growth comes out even better and healthier than before.
And you keep the essence of what's important instead of splitting your attention among 10,000 things. You just concentrate your mind into, again, what's important for you. And how did you get changed by, reading the Second Coming of Christ, written by Yogananda, or the Bhagavad Gita, God's talk to Arjuna? Did they influence your life while living there?
It influenced my life greatly. I would say that if I was stranded on an island, or I'd say if anybody stranded on an island, you could only have one book, one spiritual text to help edify your soul for the rest of your existence until you pass from that island. I would say it's the interpretation of Bhagavad Gita by Paramanhansa Yogananda. God talks with Arjuna. This is like the manual for the spiritual life, and it's so, I mean, from start to finish. And what's nice is it's pretty organized. Now, if you come from a Christian background, you're a little bit of hesitant to dive into, say, the Bhagavad Gita and how the Eastern philosophy looks at things. I'd say the Second Coming of Christ, which is Yogananda's interpretations of the Gospels of the Bible, is another alternative. It's essentially the same wisdom that's in the Bhagavad Gita. The only difference is, one, for people who are familiar with the Christian faith, you recognize the parables and the things that he's interpreting there. The other thing, which it's a little less organized, though, because the Gospels are all over the place. They're not necessarily a step-by-step instruction, which the Bhagavad Gita was set up so already as, it's essentially a treatise to enlightenment. Ultimately, either volume, the Bhagavad Gita or the Second Coming of Christ, is something that will take you all the way on your spiritual path. Again, if you could only have one text, I would choose one of those and really dive into it.
Yeah, there are so many correlations between the two texts. Even the Bhagavad Gita was written several thousand years before the Bible, but there are tons of correlations. And to me, I think Bhagavad Gita is a little bit more encrypted, and I really needed that explanation done by Paramanhansa Yogananda. The Bible you can read and you can have your own interpretation, is not that encrypted. But Bhagavad Gita is really, it's a poem, and you have to understand the poem and what's behind the words and the parables. It's quite...
I would say the Bhagavad Gita itself is about this big. It's like it's like a chapter in in a larger volume of things. But in that chapter is all the wisdom packed into it. But like you said, to get all the wisdom of the universe into, I forget how many quatrains or phrases, whatever you call them, in there, it has to be very encrypted. And so, from let's say 50 pages of what is the Bhagavad Gita, the interpretation becomes 800 pages. And that shows you how much wisdom has to get distilled from that. Now, I would disagree on the Bible, though. The Bible's been so misinterpreted that it's great to get an interpretation by somebody who purportedly had cosmic consciousness, had the wisdom of the universe coming through him, so that the interpretation that he gave was devoid of any personal gain or any desire to convert somebody to one thing or another, and it's just pure essential wisdom of the soul.
Yeah, I agree with you that even I found different meanings than what I knew from before reading the Second Coming of Christ. And of course, there are many interpretations based on the time of the world was going through, and taking one's advantage, So yes, I agree that that's a very straightforward explanation of the, Jesus's teachings and how we should apply them in our daily life. So while at SRF, did you travel the world to meet with any devotees in various countries?
Well, sort of, not the world, but did a little bit of travel. You got to understand, as a monk, basically, you're living a reclusive life. We weren't totally cut off from the world, but the idea was, the lifestyle is an inner lifestyle, and the monks were charged with disseminating the teachings to the public. So there was the need to go to services, much like Sunday service at church, to give, to expound on the teachings, and to go to different locations. This was it is a worldwide organization, so you need to service the different groups and centers around the world. However, that was done by monks who were more senior, generally speaking. You wouldn't even get a chance to be talking to the public until you'd been there at least 15 years. And for those who hadn't been there that long, you might have been, we always traveled in pairs. 2 or 3 was the ideal, so that you're never alone and could get, taken from the herd, so to speak. So the ministers, or the people who were more senior, would have a companion. And so I was a companion to some of these ministers at times. And we went to, basically, I was in Southern California. We went to Northern California, Arizona, but that was about it for my traveling. However, one of my duties as a monk was to coordinate all of the tours that went around the world. So every year, 2 monks went to 20 different locations around the world to do exactly what I just said, to serve the groups that were in that area, to give a public lecture, to bring more interest in, to have Kriya Yoga ceremonies, to induct people who are ready to take final vows in committing to their relationship to Yogananda as their guru. So I was part of that travel, but not traveling myself.
Understood. So when did you know that it's time for you to move on, and why Rhythmia at that time?
Well, Rhythmia didn't come for another 13 years after I left the monastic order. But at the time, we really are training ourselves to understand and listen to the inner voice, right? And my inner voice, about 10 years in, let's say 9.5, because it took about 6 months to really make this decision, but I started hearing that it's time to go. It's time to move on, which I'd heard in the past. From time to time, you have doubts, just like anything. Is this job really for me? Is this relationship really for me? And you kind of toss it around. And then, usually we just meditate a little bit deeper and apply ourselves more, and those thoughts would dissipate. But this time that thought kept sticking. It's time to move. It's time to keep going. And it started to agitate me a bit. Emotionally, things started to come up. And because here I was in if you imagine to bridge the gap, I usually say, imagine that you were choosing to get a divorce or not, to leave your hometown or not, and to leave your job or not. Put all 3 of those together, and that was essentially the decision I was trying to make. And to compound it, the one that I was divorcing was God. So it's like, if you've ever had to make any of those decisions, there's usually a lot of anxiousness, anxiety, self-doubt, questioning, am I doing the right thing? What is the right thing? And so all this was going on. And even meditations weren't helping at that point, because there was just too much emotional turmoil. This is when I actually found breathwork, which is, now what I've been, a breathwork trainer and facilitator for the last 13 years. I initially found breathwork while I was still in the monastic ashram, and it helped me even where meditation couldn't at that point, because it was helping me to come to terms with all this emotional energy, and gave me a process to help integrate that energy. And in that process, then the breathwork actually helped me to make the decision, because and I outline this in and as you mentioned, I was a contributing author to a book called Align, Expand, and Succeed, Shifting the Paradigm of Entrepreneurial Success. It's about, merging the field of business with consciousness. And so to come to this new conscious business ideal. But in there, I outlined a way to, when you're at a crossroads, you're trying to make an important decision in your life, how to really get in tune with what is authentically true for you. So here I was, in this path. I essentially dedicated my life to it, just like, you get married, you're not married for 5 years, you're getting married essentially for life, even though it half the time doesn't end that way these days. And I was trying to, and then on the other hand was the unknown. It was like, I didn't have a job, I didn't have a place to live, I didn't know what the heck I was going to do. The world was a scary place, so said this side of the fence. And so I sat there and breathed, I breathed in this technique and just sat with this option of staying in the monastic order, which on paper had all the pros, basically. But as I breathed, all I could feel was this contraction, this sense of essentially suffocation. And then I took the other option, which was, wide open, sort of scary, didn't know what I was going to do. But as I breathed on that option, all I felt was this expansion, this excitement, this enthusiasm for it. And that, that showed me what was truly at the core of my heart, what my soul was desiring for me to do, despite the fact that, this path, this lifestyle of the monastic life was supposedly the pinnacle of our existence, the last stop on the road to self-realization and all that. I realized that what my soul needed was still experience out in this world, and really to bring everything that I'd learned, in the monastic life into life in the secular world, but keep on going with that lifestyle. And that's where, in now, sort of thinking back onto what elements really created this lifestyle, I came up with what we call the 5 daily habits of highly spiritual people, which, now is part of what I teach in my life and current occupation.
Interesting. So in other words, you listen to your body, what your body gave you, what the signs the body gave you. So you listened to them, you went deeper, and you took the right path for you at that particular moment in time. So in other words, each of us should listen and be aware and pay more attention to what our body tells us. And again, there are many books about this type of techniques, but we really have to quiet our mind, quiet our bodies in order to read these signs, correct?
Well, exactly. And I'd say, basically, I was listening to my intuition, which can come in many different forms. But for me, it came in the form of a visceral sensation of the body. So listening to the body, what we call listening to the gut, is one form of tuning into that intuition. And if you like, I don't know if your listeners out there want to have the chapter that I wrote, I'm happy if you want to put my contact information in the notes here. They can request, please send me the chapter on listening to your intuition, and I can send them that, which is great. It tells my story, and then at the end it gives step-by-step instructions on how to utilize this technique, so that if you are experiencing a crossroads where it's like, do I stay in this job or do I do something else? Do I stay in this relationship or do I do something else? Do I, whatever your major decision point is, this can help you tune in with what is truly your soul speaking to you.
Thank you. We'll add that link to your chapter. And for those who don't know what Kriya Yoga is a scientific way of, attaining self-realization, and it's based on breath work, pretty much. If you want to expand a little bit on that, Christian.
Well, I like how you said that, because that's what I really realized when I went into the field of breath work, was that, I start out working with breathwork in this Transformational Breath Foundation that I learned it in after becoming a monk. When I looked back, I realized that all the techniques that I'd been using in Kriya Yoga were essentially modified breathing techniques. So we just, as monks, we'd focused on working with the life force energy, the prana. And so we were never really, at least in my mind, I was never really identifying with the breath. But when I took a look at how were we manipulating that pranic energy, it was by manipulating our breathing in certain very specific ways. So yes, Kriya Yoga in a way is a process of using the breath in a very specific way, and really using the breath as the carrier of prana, or this life force energy, to then bring yourself into higher and higher states of conscious awareness.
Yes, and I can tell you that I recently read a book about the Egyptian way of reaching enlightenment and a higher level of consciousness, and they also used breathing along the spine the same way, similar to Kriya Yoga. So it's a well-known, at least in the antiquity, how this breath can be used in order to reach divinity and higher level of consciousness.
Well, it's not any surprise to me, because through what I teach with breathwork is that it is the foundation of our life. It's the first movement, essentially, of life that we perform independent of our mother. When we finally come out of the womb and the umbilical cord is cut, our first act of volition is to take that breath, and from there, the breath is our guide and our God-given tool for coming into deeper understanding of who we actually are as spiritual beings. But what's great is it's the confluence of who we are as spiritual beings, emotional beings, and ultimately physical beings. So that's why it's such a foundational part of who we are.
Yes. Moving now to another period of your life, which is rhythmia. I mean, I know of Jerry Powell. I exchange emails with him. I read his book. I know what he's doing, and it's very, exciting to be there. How was life at rhythmia for you?
Interestingly, life at rhythmia, Jerry used to joke, because he said when we'd be talking to different participants there, he'd say, I invited Christian on down. I said, Christian, come on down to Costa Rica. It's beautiful. It's, there's tons of gorgeous women and all sorts of great things to do and all that. And then I get there, and the lifestyle was closer to the lifestyle as a monk than anything else that I'd done since I was there. Since I'd gotten out, basically, because I lived and worked on the resort, or and similar to as a monk, we lived and worked on the same property. The work was very similar in that it was very helping people to further their understanding and realization of who they truly were and what their purpose, and clearing out a lot of the baggage of the past. So the experience for me was very similar, only at least I got a lot more social interaction, because a different group of 80 people would come in every week to experience this amazing program.
So Jerry tricked you in other words.
He tricked me in. He tricked me in, but it was for my own good. Definitely. Of course, I learned a heck of a lot there. He's an amazing guy, very astute businessman, but then also, I mentioned that book earlier, Align, Expand, and Succeed, about merging consciousness and business. And that's exactly what Rhythmia is. It's a business that is also about raising consciousness. So, it plays both sides of the coin, essentially. And so I learned a lot from being there and from Jerry himself.
Can you share with us any of your, ayahuasca experiences? Did you find your mentor?
Well, let's see. One night I was in the bathroom puking and shitting all night long. I say that semi-jokingly, but what is it? Whenever people start researching ayahuasca, first of all, there's the eye-opening wisdom that comes from opening different parts of your brain, but oftentimes it comes along with also physical purging, which is an energetic purging, which usually manifests through a physical channel, which often is vomiting or having diarrhea or such. It doesn't have to be that way. Often you can shake, you can yawn, you can make noises. There's all sorts of ways to purge, but it is a process for opening up that awareness that most of us don't have open as we guide ourselves through physical reality. The demands of life tend to keep us sort of myopic, and we're like, all right, I gotta make money so I can put food on the table, so I can go, have some fun at the club or concert or whatever, and I can meet somebody and grow a family and buy a house and blah, blah, blah. So you're constantly in that, forgetting, that all that is just in service to a larger ideal, which is, once again, our own evolution towards self-realization, towards recognizing who we are ultimately as a soul and as a piece or a part of the cosmic awareness, or what we might call God. So, I could go into the details of specific experiences, but let's just say that the ayahuasca experiences were very much like the experiences I had when as I mentioned, my first God realization was in a psychedelic experience where, I looked into the clear blue sky. It was daylight, not a cloud was in the sky. And as I looked up, I just felt this presence that I knew as God talking to me. There was no words, there were no voices, it was just this energetic exchange that, yes, we were in communion, and there was no doubt in me. Every fiber of my being was aware of this greater consciousness. And then to top it off, a bee came around, and normally I'd be like trying to avoid it, but I just watched it, and then I put out my hand. The bee came and it landed right in my hand, and then I just sat there for what seemed to be eternity, but it was probably a couple minutes, and the bee just hung out and walked around, and then finally it flew off again. And so, like I said, that started my quest. And then what I found interesting was coming to Rhythmia was like coming full circle in my whole journey of spirit and how I got there, and now assisting others really in what the value of the ayahuasca is, maybe more what I'd want to touch on, is it gives you a temporary opening. You get to open into a corridor of your consciousness that normally isn't quite open for you. And so it gives you an understanding that, oh, I'm not just this myopic entity that's concerned with all these things. There's so much more going on. And then in that, people usually leave with a whole new lease on life, you know, a whole new direction to go, a whole new understanding of how they're going to live their lives differently. And this is what's changing the planet one person at a time.
Yes, it's very important for them to act on the message they received from Mother Ayahuasca. Otherwise, there is no point in doing this over and over again if you don't act in order to, you know, make that decision and change your life for the good.
Well, I would say that's definitely what I'd say there is, and I learned this, how to articulate this from Greg Braden, who you mentioned that I've worked with in the past and continue to work with today. He delineated two phases. There's awakening, and then there's mastery. Right. So when you have an ayahuasca experience, or had the experience like I had early in my life, or any kind of, you know, thing that awakens you, usually you get, all right, wow, I get things at a deeper level. I understand life. Oh, I know how life operates now. I know what I'm supposed to do or whatever. But then moves into the mastery phase. It's like taking that awakening, which is usually a temporary experience, and how do you apply the elements of that waking day in and day out in your everyday life? And that becomes the path of mastery. And that's where, like I said, the 5 daily habits of highly spiritual people, you know, is basically 5 things that you do every day that keep you evolving towards holding on to that awakening so you can live it day in and day out of your life. As you said, if you don't act after that awakening, it's like watching a movie that you're inspired by. You know, let's say it's a movie that about, you know, keeping the planet clean, and then instead of you know, then you just go and you go to McDonald's and you throw your trash on the road, whatever, you know, versus go and then actually do something about it, you know, volunteer for a beach cleanup, or you know, learn how to you know, the ins and outs of recycling and start a program in your neighborhood or something like that. You know, you have to act on the inspiration, or else it's all it is, you know, another passing thought, essentially.
Yes, and Spiritually Inspired show, the one we're doing right now, is a result of such message I received. And for me, doing this type of ceremony is a way of healing. If you have a physical disease, you can heal that. If you have a spiritual or a mental disease, you can also heal that. It's as you said, it's a type of purging what's not necessary for this physical body and for our souls.
What I'd say to that is to recognize that it's not the plant medicine or the ayahuasca that's doing the healing. You are doing the healing, and this is one fine point. People can get caught up in that. I need this external thing in order to make me whole, and that's not true. The external thing can be a helpful aid in opening up the conscious awareness that you have all the power within you. But that same conscious awareness can come from meditation, say Kriya Yoga, and that's, you know, all the power that you ever needed, all the power that you'll ever need is always within you. And it's up to you to act and to bring out that power. But of course, there are tools, you know, just like you could build some kind of structure without tools, and you could do it, but it's going to take a long time and might not be as well done. Or you can find things like a hammer and a saw and all that, and that's going to help speed up the process, basically. And what you create is done faster, more efficiently, and ultimately better. And so that's what I'd say. Like, plant medicine is one of these tools that can help you speed up the process of your evolution if you're aware of what you're doing. But can also be a trap if, like you said, you don't act. You just keep on going back again and again to get more inspiration. That, you know, again, is going to be like going to a movie. You know, you keep going to different movies that make you really inspired. That's great. That's great. That's great. But once the movie's done, you know, you're just back to your old life.
Or as Paramanhansa Yogananda used to say, you go for so many teachers or teachings, and you read and read and read, but you never stick to one teacher which you resonate with. And in the end, you don't gain too much spiritual knowledge, or you don't step on a spiritual path and stay the course, because you are always hungry for something new without applying what you learned before.
Right, what he calls spiritual indigestion. Basically, you keep consuming, but you don't apply. And I'd say, the danger there, or just the pitfall, is that you learn one thing from one teacher and then another thing from another teacher, and oftentimes they're not totally in alignment. They're, in the details. Basically, at the core, they're usually in alignment. But you start following one teacher, and then you reach this point where it starts to get a little difficult. And you're like, oh, I don't want to, it's hard for me to keep following this. And then you look over here and say, this teacher doesn't tell me I have to do that, so I'm going to do that now. And it's like in the weaving in and out, you never get a chance to meet the challenge head on and overcome it, which is really, what we're talking about is commitment. And commitment either to a teacher, commitment to a relationship, commitment to an occupation, whatever. If you keep bouncing off, from one person, it gets hard. So you're like, I'm out of there. I'm going to go to this relationship. Oh, it's hard there. Let's go to a new one. That challenge is going to follow you wherever you go. And until you actually stop and stay with that person, that occupation, or in this case, we're talking about a spiritual teacher, you don't get a chance to dive deeper.
Yes. How did the Rhythmia's clients find the program you had in place, the breath flow?
They loved it. In fact, the plant medicine was the star of the show, but really Jerry, when he got his downloads for creating Rhythmia, he got it from the moon, by the way. That's his story, and I'll let you can find that on his videos and stuff. But basically, the moon told him, you're going to create this program, and people are going to heal through plant medicine and breath. And at the time, he was like, breath, what the heck, So his best guess was, well, you have to breathe when you're doing plant medicine, so I guess that's it. Then, interestingly, and this is, the interwoven mechanisms, a client of mine 10 years earlier, an artist, I'll say his name, John Mosley, because he creates great spiritual art. He went down to Rhythmia to purvey his art, to try to get it on the walls when Rhythmia was just beginning. And talking with Jerry, he heard this story, and he says, well, I've got to show you this technique that, I learned from my teacher, which was me years ago. And he took Jerry through some sessions, and Jerry said, this is it. He basically said it gave him the same experience as ayahuasca, he said, but it was even more visual for him. So, which is saying a lot. He with his journeys, which is not the same for everybody. I mean, you can have visions, but it's not necessary. So he put this technique into the program. And essentially how it goes, you come in, you do breath work one night to sort of introduce you to the transformation that's possible, while still, you're not committing yourself to hours of being on the medicine. Then you go into the medicine for 4 nights. Then you come back out and you end it with the breath work again, which sort of ties up loose ends, gives you a technique to go home with, and really plants in your consciousness that, yes, I can do this on my own. Plant medicine has helped me, but I still have a tool I can use when I'm home and I don't have access to plant medicine. So a lot of people, I would always at the end of the week have a little poll. I'd say, how many people thought your breath experiences were at least as powerful as your plant medicine experiences? Every week, half the room would raise their hand. Then I said, how many people think their breath experience was even more powerful than their plant medicine experience. And invariably, about half a dozen people would raise their hands. So there are two techniques that have, the possibility of creating the same result. A lot of times it's really just what you resonate more with. And for a lot of people, plant medicine is a bit scary, or it's out of your, your moral or your religious or whatever construct, or you just don't want to do it. And breath is there as, I'd say, I called it breath your original medicine, because it is what, is the medicine of life itself. And not only did it bring us to life, but then brings us into conscious awareness. And so, so a lot of people resonate with the breath work.
Nice. So after so many phases of your life, do you see yourself ending or retiring into another monastic order or similar monastic order?
Well, now, I'm no longer working with Rhythmia. I'm back out on my own. I plan to stay teaching breath work. I have a lot of plans with Greg Braden to continue to work with him and share this work in his programs. My life for myself, at least this phase, part of moving out of that monastic ashram was to bring that, bring the essence of that lifestyle into everyday life, and say, it doesn't matter where you're placed in the world, what occupation, what family type of situation, what economic situation, the formula is the same. You can do some very basic things to keep yourself traveling on this route of evolution. And it's, granted, I will say that it's a bit more of a challenge out in the world, because you have to pay to contend with friends, social life, what have you, which takes, pulls at your time. Whereas as monks, all of our time was dedicated to these spiritual activities. But it's not impossible. And this is the whole message, is that we all have the power to traverse these things. So do I see myself becoming a monk again in the future? Actually, in a way, with, as this interview goes out, we are in the middle of this COVID-19 epidemic and all that, and under quarantine. And believe it or not, quarantine is a lot like monastic living. And so I've been doing Facebook Lives and sharing some wisdom of, again, how do you live this way without going crazy? If it's, as monks, we were voluntarily living this lifestyle, but as here it's forced on a lot of us. But if you can make that mindset adjustment and realize that this is really a chance to go within, to improve ourselves, to learn to trust our inner capacities and our resilience, it can be a great experience. So in some ways, I'll always be living like a monk. In others, whether I go retire in a formal community where we're practicing techniques together every day, that remains to be seen.
And to add more to the idea of, environment, the environment affects you. You can be the change by talking to your friends and trying to do this type of breath work together or meditate together. I think even if they are not into it, but they do it once, they might like it, and then can become a habit for the whole group, even if you do it remotely or, together in the same room when possible. But it's a suggestion which can be implemented, and you shouldn't be ashamed or shy to suggest these type of things to your group of friends.
Well, exactly. And that essentially is my mission in life. I mean, my mission is twofold. One, to, trod the path of my own evolution towards self-realization. And then two, to guide and help others on their own journey towards that evolution and self-realization. So being out here to share the breathwork, share anything, share Rhythmia, the plant medicine, the techniques of meditation, what have you, little seeds to plant to start sprouting in the consciousness of individuals, that they, that their health, their happiness, and ultimately their prosperity is intimately linked with them understanding who they truly are as souls, and investing less in the physical reality of I'm this being who has to make a living and run a household and all that, and investing more in the understanding that I'm a soul, that part of me is this that I have to take care of, but so much more of me, so much more importance happens outside of that, again, myopic view of who we are.
Christian, I will display all your information in the description of this video, but anything else you'd like to add as a conclusion, how people can get to you? Maybe they want private sessions, they want group sessions, it's all through your website, or there is any other way?
Yeah, well, my website, breathflow.com or rchristianminson.com. You can find me at either of those. To start your journey, if you're interested more, you want that chapter of the book, you'll give them my contact information in your liner notes to this interview. Just to say that life is about evolution of your consciousness and evolution of your understanding of who you truly are as a being of God, and to remember your divinity, and nothing else is going to provide lasting satisfaction other than that realization. So to make that a priority in your life, and that's essentially what I'm here to provide, tools and as a sounding board, as a coach, and otherwise to help people to steer their lives on that path and make that priority more part of their life, so that people can wake up happier today than they were yesterday, and keep that trend going until the end of life.
And again, you have amazing credibility, and you build your own brand, but at the same time, you are associated with some big names, like, as you mentioned, Greg Braden. That gives you even more validity in this world of, breath work, breath flow, and people can trust your experience.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate people like Greg who have taken an interest in me. Basically, he did the breath work, and he was, and unlike a lot of the thought leaders, people of higher level, they kind of stay reserved and don't always fully put themselves into it. He let himself be guided. He trusted me, which I honor greatly, to guide him in it. He had amazing emotional catharsis, and he said, I want to offer something like this in my programs. And that's why he invited me in to do that. And we've worked together a number of times now. And like I said, we'll continue to, as soon as this pandemic has gone by the wayside.
Christian, thank you very much for your time, for all your sharings with us today. I really I know people learn a lot from our conversation. So until next time, love and gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for acting on your inspiration and providing this forum to start bringing spiritual awareness to people.
Thank you.